Welcome everyone to the English Lessons for All debate. Today we will discuss the motion. Citizens should be allowed to carry guns. On my left we have the affirmative team, who will argue for the motion. On my right we have the negative team, who will argue against it. We will begin with opening statements from both sides, starting with the affirmative team.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Esteemed judges, ladies and gentlemen, the affirmative team stands resolute in support of the motion. Citizens should be allowed to carry guns. Our position is rooted in the fundamental right to self-preservation, the empowering of law-abiding citizens, and the undeniable deterrent effect that an armed populace can have on criminal activity. We believe that empowering responsible individuals with the means to defend themselves is not a step towards chaos, but a cornerstone of a truly secure society. When citizens are allowed to carry guns, they become their own first line of defense, a critical safeguard when every second counts. This is about trust, responsibility, and the inherent right to protect oneself and one's loved ones against those who would do harm. We look forward to demonstrating how this right strengthens, rather than weakens, the fabric of our communities.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Esteemed judges, ladies and gentlemen, the negative team stands firmly against the motion that citizens should be allowed to carry guns. While our opponents speak of self-preservation, empowerment, and deterrence, we believe that granting widespread access to firearms to the general populace is not a path to security, but a direct route to increased violence, tragic accidents, and profound societal instability. The notion that an armed society is a polite society is a dangerous myth. Instead, widespread gun ownership invariably leads to an escalation of conflict, transforms minor disputes into fatal encounters, and places law enforcement and emergency services under even greater strain. We contend that the true measure of a secure society lies not in its citizens' capacity for armed response, but in the absence of the need for it. Our arguments will demonstrate that allowing citizens to carry guns undermines public safety, fosters an environment of fear, and ultimately fails to deliver on the promise of greater security, instead introducing an unprecedented level of risk into our daily lives.
The negative team raises concerns about increased violence, accidents, and societal instability, painting a rather alarmist picture. However, their arguments fundamentally misunderstand the concept of responsible gun ownership and the motivations of law-abiding citizens. They suggest that allowing citizens to carry guns will invariably lead to an escalation of conflict and minor disputes becoming fatal. This overlooks the crucial distinction we make. We are advocating for responsible, law-abiding citizens to exercise their right to self-defense, not for an unregulated free-for-all. These are individuals who have a clear understanding of the gravity of carrying a firearm and are committed to its lawful and defensive use. The notion that this would somehow strain law enforcement ignores the reality that armed citizens can act as immediate deterrents and first responders, often before law enforcement can even arrive. In critical moments, every second counts, and an armed citizen is not a burden, but a vital link in the chain of community safety. Their fear the negative team speaks of is precisely what criminals should feel, knowing that their potential victims are not helpless. Their argument relies on the unsubstantiated belief that responsible citizens will become sources of chaos, rather than effective protectors of themselves and their communities.
The affirmative team attempts to dismiss our concerns as alarmist, suggesting we misunderstand responsible gun ownership. However, our concerns are not born of misunderstanding, but of an undeniable understanding of human fallibility and the inherent escalation that firearms introduce into any conflict. To simply assert that responsible, law-abiding citizens will only use guns for lawful and defensive purposes is to ignore the tragic reality that even the most responsible individuals can make fatal errors, react impulsively under stress, or find themselves in situations where a gun turns a solvable dispute into an irreversible tragedy. The notion that armed citizens become first responders and vital links is not empowering. It is a dangerous abdication of the state's primary responsibility for public safety and places an unbearable, untrained burden on ordinary people. Far from easing the strain on law enforcement, this scenario risks creating more confusion, misidentification, and accidental shootings, making the job of trained professionals infinitely more perilous. And while the affirmative team wishes for criminals to feel fear, the documented reality is that widespread gun ownership often leads to an arms race, where everyone, including criminals, becomes more heavily armed, escalating the potential for harm and fostering a general climate of anxiety, not security, among the populace. Our arguments are not based on unsubstantiated beliefs, but on the grim statistics of increased gun violence, accidental shootings, and suicides consistently observed in societies that embrace widespread civilian gun carrying.
The negative team attempts to ground their argument in human fallibility and the spectre of an arms race, yet these points serve only to deflect from the core issue, the inherent right to self-defense when faced with immediate danger. They claim that even responsible individuals can make fatal errors, but this is a generalization that ignores the rigorous training, licensing, and psychological evaluations often required for legal gun ownership. It is precisely because danger exists that citizens need the means to defend themselves, not despite it. The arms race theory, where everyone becomes more heavily armed, is a mischaracterization. In reality, an armed populace acts as a significant deterrent. Studies, such as those by Professor John Lott Jr., demonstrate that areas with higher rates of concealed carry often experience a decrease in violent crime, as criminals are less likely to target victims who may be able to defend themselves. For instance, in states that adopted right to carry laws, there was a statistically significant reduction in violent crime rates. This isn't about an arms race among law-abiding citizens, it's about shifting the risk calculation for predators. Furthermore, the idea that armed citizens create more confusion for law enforcement is often contradicted by real-world scenarios where armed citizens have detained active shooters or prevented further harm before police arrive. To deny a citizen this crucial ability, based on generalized fears, is to leave them vulnerable and disarmed against those who will never abide by the law.
The affirmative team attempts to dismiss our valid concerns about human fallibility as a mere deflection, and suggests that rigorous training, licensing, and psychological evaluations are sufficient safeguards. This is a naive overestimation of their efficacy. Even with the most stringent training, which is by no means universally applied or consistently enforced for all civilian gun owners, the inherent stresses of a life-threatening encounter can profoundly impair judgment and motor skills, leading to tragic miscalculations. We cannot simply legislate away the human element of panic, fear, and error. Furthermore, the affirmative's reliance on Professor John Lott Jr.'s studies regarding right-to-carry laws and decreased crime is highly contentious. Numerous other academic studies, utilizing more robust methodologies and broader data sets, have found no such link, or indeed have concluded the opposite. That increased gun availability correlates with an increase in violent crime. Causal links are complex, and attributing crime reduction solely to increased gun carrying ignores a myriad of socioeconomic factors. The idea of an armed populace acting as a significant deterrent is similarly flawed. It fails to account for the very real and documented phenomenon of an arms race, where criminals themselves respond to increased civilian armament by acquiring more powerful weapons, thus escalating the lethality of encounters, not reducing them. And regarding armed citizens alleviating the burden on law enforcement, while isolated instances of heroic intervention may occur, the prevailing consensus from law enforcement agencies themselves is that more guns in public, especially in chaotic situations, create immense confusion, increase the risk of accidental shootings, and make it significantly harder for officers to distinguish between threats and potential victims. To rely on untrained civilians to consistently act as effective first responders is to gamble with public safety and to abdicate the state's responsibility, leading to greater, not lesser, societal risk.
Thank you both teams for your detailed and passionate arguments on this complex topic. We have heard strong points regarding the right to self-defense, public safety, and the societal impact of gun ownership. As we continue, please ensure your responses remain focused on the core motion and build upon your key arguments.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Esteemed judges, ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude this debate, the affirmative team stands by its unwavering conviction: citizens should be allowed to carry guns. We have demonstrated that this is not a reckless proposition, but a fundamental acknowledgement of the inherent right to self-preservation. We empower law-abiding citizens, not criminals, fostering a society where individuals are not helpless victims, but capable protectors of themselves and their loved ones. We have highlighted the undeniable deterrent effect that an armed populace has on violent crime, shifting the risk away from potential victims and onto those who would seek to do harm. While our opponents have raised concerns about fallibility and an arms race, we have consistently countered these with the realities of responsible gun ownership, rigorous training, and the proven instances where armed citizens have acted as crucial first responders, mitigating harm before official help can arrive. To deny this right based on generalized fears is to abandon citizens to vulnerability. We firmly believe that allowing citizens to carry guns, under responsible regulations, strengthens the fabric of our communities, enhances public safety, and upholds a fundamental liberty. It is a vital component of a truly secure and free society.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Esteemed judges, ladies and gentlemen, as this debate draws to a close, the negative team remains unyielding in its conviction. Citizens should absolutely not be allowed to carry guns. Our opponents speak eloquently of self-preservation, empowerment, and deterrence, yet these ideals, when translated into the reality of widespread civilian armament, pave a dangerous path. We have consistently demonstrated that this motion does not lead to a secure and free society, but rather to increased violence, tragic accidental deaths, and profound societal instability. The assertion that responsible gun ownership will avert these dangers is, regrettably, a wishful fantasy that ignores the inherent fallibility of human nature and the uncontrollable escalation that firearms introduce into any conflict. We have presented evidence that the deterrent effect is often nullified by an arms race, where criminals become more heavily armed, thereby increasing the lethality for all. Furthermore, the notion of armed citizens acting as first responders places an unbearable, untrained burden on ordinary individuals, whilst simultaneously creating immense confusion and risk for our professional law enforcement. To allow citizens to carry guns is not to enhance public safety, it is to fundamentally undermine it, transforming everyday disputes into potentially fatal encounters and fostering a pervasive environment of fear rather than security. The true measure of a safe society is not how well its citizens are armed, but how effectively we eliminate the need for such armament in the first place. For these reasons, we urge you to reject this motion, for the sake of a truly safer, more stable society.
Thank you to both the affirmative and negative teams for your engaging and thoughtful arguments on the motion, citizens should be allowed to carry guns. We have heard a comprehensive discussion of the right to self-defense, public safety, and the broader societal implications of gun ownership. This concludes our debate for today. Thank you for joining us.